Open your Bibles to Ephesians chapter 5. Ephesians chapter 5. Continuing our study in the second half of this letter where Christianity becomes very practical. It's no longer about the theory behind salvation, but how this comes down to our daily lives. And the word walk occurs frequently throughout this section, talking about how we live our life. The first 7 verses here of the 5th chapter talking about walking in love. So let's read those and come back and look at them. Therefore be imitators of God as dear children, and walk in love as Christ has also loved us, and given himself for us, an offering and sacrifice to God for a sweet-smelling aroma. But fornication and all uncleanness or covetousness, let it not even be named among you, as is fitting for saints. Neither filthiness, nor foolish talking, nor coarse jesting, which are not fitting, but rather giving of thanks. For this you know that no fornicator, or unclean person, or covetous man who is an idolater, has any inheritance in the kingdom of Christ and God. Let no one deceive you with empty words, for because of these things the wrath of God comes upon the sons of disobedience. Therefore do not be partakers with them. So we have here some do's and some don'ts. 2 do's here in verses 1 and 2. First, be imitators of God. Following him, being like him, and doing so as dear children. We're children of God. John the apostle said, what manner of love the Father has bestowed upon us that we should be called the children of God. So we're to imitate God, we're to walk in love, and then he gives us an example of that love, the love that Christ had. Walk in love as also Christ loved us, and given himself for us, an offering and a sacrifice to God for a sweet-smelling aroma. Now, that's figurative language. Obviously, there was no sweet smell attached to the crucifixion of Christ, but in the Scriptures, in the Old Testament, when they would offer sacrifices, those would be burnt, and the aroma, it was said, would be a sweet-smelling aroma in God, in the eyes of God. And so he's using that imagery there to talk about the fact that God is pleased with the sacrifice Christ made, and he offered himself to God. So the sacrifice was made to God by Jesus. Sometimes we talk about Jesus paying the ransom price, and I've heard people say, well, to whom did he pay the price? Some people say, well, he paid the ransom to Satan. But this verse tells us who he paid it to. He paid the ransom price to the same person he was sacrificed to. Who was he sacrificed to? To God. So he paid the ransom price to God. That was an offering, a sacrifice. And so because of what Christ has done, we need to respond to that in love, walking in love and imitating God. Then the don'ts, verse 3. But fornication and all uncleanness or covetousness, let it not even be named among you, as is fitting for saints. Neither filthiness, nor foolish talking, nor coarse jesting, which are not fitting, but rather the giving of thanks. Let me stop there and notice some of these words here. Some of these words are related. Fornication, uncleanness, perhaps even covetousness to some extent. Those words are related in the sense that they're sexual sins. Fornication is unlawful sexual intercourse of any kind. It's a broader term. Adultery is a specific kind of fornication. Homosexuality is a specific kind of fornication. But fornication is the umbrella term that covers all of that. So fornication, and then uncleanness, he's talking about moral uncleanness. Filthy, thinking filthy, acting filthy, talking filthy, moral filth of any kind. And covetousness, even though we oftentimes relate that to things, and that's certainly true, but sometimes it can be related to sexual sins. Jesus talked about looking at a woman to lust for her. That's covetousness. Even in the 10 Commandments, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife. So that's covetousness. So notice how those words are connected there in that context. Let it not even be named among you. Don't even speak of this. Later on, he'll even say that. It's not right to even speak of these things. Neither filthiness, now these are kind of related as well. Filthiness, nor foolish talking, nor coarse jesting. Filthiness, he's talking about obscenity. Okay, again, not physical filthiness, but obscenity. You can be obscene in your language. You can be obscene in your dress. You can be obscene in your actions, and there are obscene pictures. So filthiness. Foolish talking. And he's talking about sinfully foolish. Remember something Job said to his wife. You speak as one of the foolish women speak. And what was she trying to tell him? Yeah, just curse God and die. He said, that's crazy talk. That's foolish. Okay, let's not have that kind of talk. And then coarse jesting. Now the old King James just says jesting, and that can be misleading. He's not saying it's wrong to tell a joke, but it's coarse jesting. And so most modern versions will say something along those lines. And what is coarse jesting?
Think of dirty jokes.
There you go. Yeah, it's dirty jokes and that kind of stuff. You know, you're joking, but it's coarse, it's vulgar. So coarse jesting is what we would call today dirty jokes, lewd jokes. That should not have any part in our lives. Those things are not fitting. Instead of all that junk, giving of thanks. Okay, instead of the filthiness and the foolish talk and the coarse jesting, use your tongue to give thanks to God. And the reasons stated in 5, 6, and 7. For this you know. Now, by the way, this is not like this is a mystery. That's why he said it that way. This you know. This is not clouded in mystery. This is not in doubt. Everybody knows this. Everybody understands this. This you know, that no fornicator. Now he's kind of going back over those sins again. No fornicator, no unclean person, or covetous man who is an idolater. Now notice how who is an idolater modifies that phrase covetous man. That links us up to something Paul said in the Colossian letter. He said covetousness, which is idolatry. Now why is covetousness idolatry?
Before God.
Yeah, you put your desires above God. That's right. And so no covetous person who is an idolater has any inheritance in the kingdom of Christ and God. You're not going to heaven, okay? Don't just get that out of your head. If you're living this way, you're not going to heaven. So let no one deceive you with empty words. For because of these things the wrath of God comes upon the sons of disobedience. Therefore do not be partakers with them. Stop and think about the force of those verses. You know, we argue with our friends about once saved, always saved. Right there's one of those 7 verses are some of the most powerful verses you can use against once saved, always saved. Because he's talking about children of God, verse 1. So he's not talking about sinners out there. He says, you're dear children of God. Okay, so act like it. And he starts listing all these sins. And he says, if you do that in verse 5, there's no fornicator, not even a dear child of God, no unclean person, no covetous man who is an idolater. None of that. That's not going to heaven. So these 7 verses are some of the most powerful verses you can have. That dawned on me one day a couple of years ago. I mean, we usually go to the standby passages, you know, Hebrews 6 and 1 Corinthians 10, let him that thinketh he stand, take heed lest he fall. And we go to that. But these 7 verses right here are awesomely powerful against that idea of once saved, always saved. Because he's laying it out there. He's talking to Christians. And so, in fact, he ends up in verse 7, do not be partakers with them, with the sons of disobedience. You're a Christian. Act like it. Live like it. Okay. Questions, comments, anything?
I think up at the start of when he tells them to walk, he's making the point that it's a continual thing. It's a way of life. It's a way you're to do. It ain't just that you done it. You obeyed him one time.
Yeah.
It's that you're continuing in that obedience.
Yeah, and we see that language over and over again. Even in baptism, we rise to walk. There's the word again, to walk in newness of life. And so we're not taking a step into the light. We're walking in the light. And if it's just a step now and then, that's not good enough. It's got to be a walk. It's got to be a continuous lifestyle. Now, sometimes when you're, just kind of take the illustration. If you're walking to town, and say you're 10 miles out of town, you're walking to town, you might stop and take a break and sit down. And at that moment, you're no longer walking to town. But you're on that mission, okay? Now, I use that to illustrate this. We're supposed to walk in the light. We're supposed to serve the Lord. Once in a while, we might take a step into the darkness. That's not good. Now, if you take that little step into the darkness, you can't stay there. You've got to get back on the path and start walking, see? And so that's how important that word is. It's not about a step here and a step there. It's about the direction of your life. Where's it headed? Is it heading in the right way or the wrong way? Okay. Anything else?
If you're going to town and you know the road, which way the road goes, you take the wrong fork.
Yep.
You can get back on, but if you keep going down that wrong fork, you're not going to town.
Exactly. You're heading in another direction now. Yeah. And so if you take a wrong fork, the thing to do is get back on the right path. Yeah, exactly right.
Sometimes all you hear is junk.
Yeah.
You know, dirty talking and stuff. You know, I mean, what do you either tell them you don't like it, or they're going to think, well, you think you're better than anybody, you know.
And since you brought that up, it reminded me of my days when I used to work in the plastics factory. You do hear all kinds of rough talk at work. And I learned, at least there in that factory, the women's worse than the men. They're worse than the men in the filthy talk and things they do. It's unbelievable, the things they'll say. And say it right to your face. I mean, and so yeah, you're right. And it's hard for a Christian to work in that kind of environment. You have to kind of steel yourself to it and kind of tune it out as best you can. But it isn't easy to have to listen to that all day long.
Put a stop to it, you see, you fall right on in with them.
Yeah.
You laugh at jokes that you shouldn't be laughing at.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, it's real easy and real tempting because you want to fit in, and so yeah, that's right. So we have to stay on our toes. Anything else before we go further? Yes, sir.
If you're around something like that every day, you know, for the time being you'd have to put up with it, but years and years and years of it, you can find you something else to do. That way you won't have to be around it.
Yeah. Yeah, occupy yourself in other things so you don't have to. Yeah, so you don't have to be around. Yeah.
That would keep you from coming to church, you know, on a regular. I mean, if you have to do something like right now, it'd be one thing. But if you know what's going to be years and years and years of it, you need to find something else to do.
I couldn't agree more. I think that's right. Now, every once in a while, you'll have those occasions where you have to work extra and work overtime, and it interferes. But if it's going to be an ongoing thing, it might be the best thing for you to find a different job where you can be with the Lord's people. I think that's right.
Their hobbies and their other things that, you know, many times we can look to and get involved and be around people, you know, that ain't going to be doing this. We can make make a good choice, you know, because you're going to be around sometimes you can't help it. But if you know, then you can help you. Well, I'm not going with this bunch to do this. I'm going over here.
Yeah, we had when I worked at the plastics factory, I was in the management end of it. Worked in the lab, and they would have a Christmas party every year. It was mandatory; you had to go. And for us salaried employees, we always got a week's pay for a Christmas bonus. And but you had to go to the Christmas party, and it was always a drinking party, is what it was. You know, you have a nice meal. But then there's alcohol being served. So what I did, kind of to your point, I went in, ate my steak, took my check, and I'm out of there. I'm not going to hang around and listen to this stuff and put up with this stuff, so you make adjustments. I got to be there. Okay, I'll be there. I'll hang a tie on. I'll eat my steak, grab my check, and I'm gone. So I made my appearance. And so sometimes you have to do that. You have to make adjustments. Anything else? Okay. Verse 8, another walk. Walk as children of light, verses 8 through 14. For you were once darkness, but now you're light in the Lord. Walk as children of light. For the fruit of the Spirit is in all goodness, righteousness, and truth, finding out what's acceptable to the Lord. And have no fellowship with the unfruitful works of darkness, but rather expose them. For it's shameful even to speak of those things which are done by them in secret. But all things that are exposed are made manifest by the light. For whatever makes manifest is light. Therefore he says, awake, you who sleep, arise from the dead, and Christ will give you light. So the second exhortation, walk as children of light. In Scripture we see that often, light and darkness, the contrast. And in Bible speak, it's again figurative language. Light has to do with righteousness and truth and God's will. God is light. We walk in the light as he is in the light. And then darkness then would be the contrast of sin and iniquity and wickedness. So that's the contrast. And you were once darkness. Remember where you came from. That's true of all of us. We were in the dark. We were in sin. Okay, but now things have changed. We've obeyed the gospel. So again, act like it. Walk as children of light. Now verse 9, my New King James says, for the fruit of the Spirit. Some of the other translations say, and I think probably more correctly, says the fruit of the light. Is that what yours says? There's a variation in the Greek. Some of the Greeks will say fruit of the Spirit, and some will say fruit of the light. But if you look at the context, it's probably was originally written through the light, because the Spirit kind of is out of context there. But either way, it doesn't change the truth. Okay, the message is still the same. The fruit of the Spirit, or the fruit of the light, is all goodness, righteousness, and truth. So if you're going to bear that fruit, that's what you've got to be doing. You can't be walking in the darkness. You've got to give up that old lifestyle. And then a key point of this, finding out what is acceptable to the Lord. Some versions say trying to learn what is acceptable to the Lord. I think some might even say proving what is acceptable to the Lord. But even then, you're going to be doing some studying. So this is the idea of discipleship. Finding out, trying to learn, putting to the proof or to the test what's acceptable to God. So as a disciple, we are continual students, continually trying to learn, continually examining our lives, and trying to bring it into harmony with God's will. Verse 11, have no fellowship. How much? How much fellowship? None. Okay. Now fellowship is joint participation. And I think sometimes we don't fully grasp that ideal. It's joint participation. We ask ourselves, can I have any association with sinners at all? What's the answer? Of course you can. Yeah. So, but sometimes we read a verse like that, have no fellowship. It means I can't be around them. I can't talk to them. Well, what are you going to do with Jesus? He ate with tax collectors and sinners. See, you have to.
Think about it. He had to.
Yeah.
Everybody that was around.
Where's he going to go?
Everybody.
Yeah, there would be no place for him to go. Yeah, there'd be no. Yeah, there's no place for it, no place else for him to go. And in reality, the same thing is true for us. Where else are you going to go? There's sinners everywhere.
We're supposed to preach the word and try to tell them to do different.
Exactly. And so fellowship is the idea of participating. You're joining with them in their sins. It's not that you're talking to them or being nice to them or have a relationship with them. That's not what's being forbidden. But it's joining with them. That's fellowship, joint participation. So I'm joining with you and I'm participating with you in the sin. Notice what he says. Have no fellowship with the works, the unfruitful works of darkness. Don't join them in their sins. It's not don't be friendly with them. It's don't join them in their sins. And there's three ways we can do that. Number one, by actually doing the sin. Number two, by supporting them in their sins. You can support them morally. Yay, good job. Or you can support them financially. And you can wish them well in their sins. That's fellowshipping sin. When you do it or support it or encourage it. That's fellowshipping sin. And we can't do that. Yes, sir. All right.
This day and time, everybody watches TV. You got some shows on TV. I mean, you know that you're not supposed to be watching them to begin with. I mean, I'm talking about just regular shows. There's all kinds of cuss and stuff going on. The way I look at it, there's two ways. You're either against it or you're for it. You know, it's an episode on TV. What are you going to do? Well, I don't know what to tell you, but I mean, I know what I do. If I ever get a chance to watch TV, it's usually on MeTV, the old Andy Griffith.
Yeah.
But what I'm getting at is, there's a lot of stuff that you don't need to be watching, and you're either, if you're watching it, just like The View used to be, you know, you're either with them or you're against them. I mean, that's just pretty much the way it is. I mean,
Yeah, we were watching a movie the other day. We tried to watch it, and it's like every 3 or 4 words was bleep, bleep, bleep. You know, I mean, horrible, gutter as it gets. And finally, I said, just turn that off. You know, and you might find in some movies 1 or 2 cuss words. I'm not saying that's good. I kind of, you know, okay, I'll watch that. But when it's just like boom, 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 one after another, I'm done. We didn't even get 10 minutes of that thing. I'm done. I'm not watching that. And we would be much better off, I think, to your point, to turn that stuff off. Don't watch it because it wears on you after a while. It wears on you. And next thing you know, you find yourself kind of going along with it and smiling at it and laughing at it. And And so you have to be careful about how much you expose yourself to that negative stuff, because it does, whether we realize it or not, it does have an impact on us. Anything else? Yes?
Andy Griffith taught that it was okay to tell a little lie once in a while.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's what I'm saying. You can nitpick things to where you couldn't even watch Andy Griffith, because there's stuff on there that's not completely morally right. But some things are obviously far worse than others. And, you know, you're not going to get in this world and not ever hear a sinful thing. That's just not the way it works. You're going to hear sinful things and you're going to see sinful things, but you don't have to just expose yourself to it constantly. You can kind of limit and make judgments.
Go back to what you said about the fellowship. There's a difference. You know, you could be in a convenience store and somebody come in and rob it. You could be witness to that and be there, but it would be different if you helped.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
just because you did see something sinful.
Let me hold the door open.
that you was exposed to something sinful is different than you condoning it, encouraging it, or helping it,
Yeah.
and we don't need to do that.
And you know, put yourself, we talked about Jesus a while ago. I would imagine, if you kind of go back and think about this a little bit, and I'm not saying I can prove this with 100% certainty, but Jesus, he's walking among sinners and associating with sinners and eating with harlots and tax collectors. You reckon he ever heard any foul stuff? Probably. And saw it. And so, you know, we're in this world. There's no way to avoid that, but we're not of it. We're supposed to isolate ourselves from it. And so you got to make good choices, wise choices about your exposure. Yes, sir.
Money to people on the sides of the road. You don't know what they're doing.
You don't know.
Not saying they're doing good or bad, but if you don't know if they are doing bad stuff, then you almost condone it.
Yeah, I agree with you. That's the way I look at it too. I'd rather help somebody I know, because then you know where it's going. And you know for sure whether they need it or not. That one who's sitting on the street corner, you don't really know. You know, in some big town, some big city you've never been in, you don't really know. Now other people, and you know, everybody's different. Other people, they're overwhelmed with a sense of guilt, and so they'll hand money to anybody and everybody. You know, they see them on the street. I look at that a little bit differently, because a lot of those people are frauds, believe it or not. You know, they're fraudulent. So if you don't know, in my mind, the safer thing would be to not do it if you don't know who they are.
People, and not everybody that I've tried to help that I knew, but you can sort of read the situation, read the person.
Yeah, you can. Yeah.
Somebody on the street corner who you ain't nothing you can read about them other than them trying to just take money.
Yeah.
But if you get saying some woman out here with 3 or 4 kids, you know, and you can tell that they ain't got a lot to wear or whatever, and you buy them something to eat, you know,
Yeah, and that's another thing, how you help them. You know, hand them money versus hand them some food. And sometimes you'll get the reaction, I don't want that. They don't want the food, they want the money because they're going to go buy drugs with it or something. So yeah, you can sometimes learn a lot by how you help them too.
Stand in the hot sun all day, they can get a job.
Well, yeah, that's that thing. You know, you say, well, you know, they're hiring right down at McDonald's 10 feet down the road. No, I don't want to do that. Well, then you don't want anything very bad, then, do you? That's right. I have too. It just depends on the situation.
You know, you see them walking, I mean, why can't they get a job?
Yeah. But you're far better, no matter who you help, you're far better to actually give them what they need. Do you need a tank of gas? Do you need some groceries? Rather than hand them money, because you don't know what they're going to do with that money. But buy them some food, buy them a tank of gas, something like that. Yes, sir.
Even in Bible days.
Yeah.
You know, we read about the beggars.
Yeah.
But I don't, some of them they may mention what's wrong with them, but I just wonder if all of them had some disablement where they couldn't work, or one of they just beggars.
It's possible. I don't know. It's been Bible time. I think nowadays is a little different circumstantially, you know, because there's so many ways to get help now. Back then, there wasn't a whole lot of ways. You know, you didn't have government welfare programs and things like that. So it was a lot harder for them. If you saw somebody in Bible times begging, they probably did need it, more than likely.
They were told to leave a part of their fields and stuff for people to be able to come in and gather.
Yep. All right.
well, there wasn't as many homeless people when I was growing up as it is a lot of people that did get assistance, you know, or got food stamp, they was just pretty ashamed of it. They didn't want to go out and flaunt it around.
That is true. There's been a shift in that. I remember when I was a kid, and this would be back in the 70s, and when things got really rough under President Carter, and the inflation, and it was gas lines and everything else. But for the first time in his life, my dad was unemployed. He'd always worked, but he'd lost his job, unemployed. And as you said, it was hard for him to ask for any help. I've never asked anybody for any help. I'm not going to go and apply for unemployment benefits. I'm too proud for that. Now, people greedily go for it. It's different. The mindset's different now.
About what they get.
Yeah, they brag about what they're drawing now, that's right. And there's some people, sadly, and I've seen this, you probably have too, but there are some people who will sit there and, like some ladies, they're drawing welfare, and they will go out and have more kids because they get more money. Not because they want kids or need kids, but they'll just do it because I get more money now. And that happens. That actually happens.
The food stamp program now to SNAP. It's
Yeah,
a
I
different
forget what that
name.
stands for. Do you remember? Okay.
Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program.
Yeah, supplemental nutrition assistance.
That's what I'm sounding.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else before we move further?
I noticed there, you know, it said, the way mine words is trying to learn what is pleasing to the Lord.
Yeah.
And that's to be our mindset. That's to be us. But you look at so much of the world, so much of religion, that ain't their mindset. What do the people want?
Yeah.
How do they want to worship? What do we like in worship? What do we like to do? It's a total different mindset, and it's not thinking of what
It's not
is
what
pleasing
does,
to God, what's pleasing to men.
yeah, it's not what does God want me to do, but what do I want to do? That's,
Well, how do we want to worship? How do we want to offer worship? You know, among us, how would, you know, that ain't it. We need to understand that we're the servants, we're the disciple, we're to worship how He wants us to worship. You know, it's to be, we're trying to determine what pleases Him, what does He want from us. And that needs to be our mindset always.
verse 11 is where we left off. Have no fellowship, we talked about that, with the unfruitful works of darkness, but instead expose them. So show it to be what it is. It's sin. Okay? Shine the light on it, which he'll talk about a little bit here in a minute. Shine the light of truth on it. For it's shameful even to speak of those things. To talk about some of the things that some people do, it's shameful even to talk about it. Okay? That's how bad some people are in their life. But all things that are exposed are made manifest by the light of truth. You shine the light of truth on it, you see. For whatever makes manifest is light. Therefore he says, awake, you who sleep, arise from the dead, spiritually dead, that's what he's talking about here. Arise from the dead, and Christ will give you light. So turning to the Word of God, we don't have to be in doubt about what's right and what's wrong, what's moral and what's immoral. You don't have to have any doubts about it. It's right there in the Word, right there. The light has exposed it to us. Okay? Anything else before we move into the next section? All right.
About baptism in the way, verse 14.
Do what now?
Verse 14 is cadet time maybe
To baptism, is it because of the rise from the dead? It might have some linkage. I hadn't thought of that. But yeah, there is a rising from the dead in baptism for sure. But I think what he's really talking about is more broad. It might include that, but it's more broad. You're asleep in sin and in ignorance, and so wake up, smell the coffee, get the light of truth on your life and change things. And certainly it would include baptism, but it wouldn't be limited to that. It would be any time in our life. Wake up and pay attention. Verse 15, the next walk circumspectly. See then you walk circumspectly, not as fools, but as wise. In that word circumspectly, do you see something that triggers a thought? We talk about the circumference of something. What's the circumference? Yeah. So you see that word circumspectly. And he said, walk circumspectly. The ideal is literally looking around, Paying attention to where you're going is the idea. And so you keep with the metaphor. You're trying to walk in the light. I want to avoid the darkness. I want to avoid the sin. And so I'm looking around and I'm paying attention. You know, we say that to our kids. Watch where you're going. And that's really what that means. Watch where you're going spiritually. Pay attention here. Where you're headed, who you're running with, what's happening in your life. Look around and pay attention. So walk circumspectly, not as fools. Don't be ignorant, but as wise. Okay, be sharp. Pay attention. Redeeming the time because the days are evil. Think about that expression as well. You can't literally redeem time. So it's a figurative expression. What does it mean to redeem?
The Standard says making the most of your time.
There you go. Making the most of it is the idea. That's the idea. But to literally redeem, you can't buy back time. Once it's gone, it's gone. Okay? You can't bring yesterday back. Yesterday is history, and there's no way to go back and change it. You know, some of these science fiction shows, you can go back in time and change things. You can't. It is what it is. What happened, happened. So redeeming the time is, to the point of your version there, is the idea of making the most of your time or making the most of your opportunity instead of wasting time. Make the most of the time that you have. And, you know, that's something that's good practical advice. We sometimes waste way too much time not doing things we should be doing, and we make excuses for not doing it instead of actually doing it. So look around, pay attention, make the best use of your time because the days are evil. We live in a wicked world. So we need to be very sharp and paying attention. Therefore, do not be unwise, but understand what the will of the Lord is. That's a command, by the way. Understand what the will of the Lord is, which implies that God gave it to us in a way that could be understood. God invented language. He knows how to communicate with his people. So understand what the will of the Lord is. Don't sit there and say, I don't know. No, open your Bibles and know. Okay. Verse 18, and do not be drunk with wine, in which is dissipation, but be filled with the Spirit. I find that to be an interesting little contrast. He's talking about drunkenness here. And there's two ways in this text that you can be drunk. Okay? You can be filled with wine, or you can be filled with the Spirit. Think about that. Get drunk on the Holy Ghost. Okay? Get drunk on the Holy Spirit instead of getting drunk on wine. That's actually what he's literally saying here. Okay? Don't be drunk with wine. Stay away from that stuff. That's the evil walk. But get high on the Lord. Of course, imbibe. Drink of this. This is what you want to drink. You don't want to drink that alcohol. You want to drink this. Okay? So be filled with the Spirit. And then how that manifests itself. Speaking to one another in psalms and hymns and spiritual songs, singing and making melody in your heart to the Lord. Now, in the context here, he's not talking about a worship service. He's talking about your daily walk. And it reminds me of something I used to do with the elders over at Hickory Grove. We'd take off, head for a gospel meeting. And just out of the blue, Brother Fletcher would jar down on a spiritual song. We'd be driving down the highway heading for a gospel meeting, singing away. And that's kind of the idea of the verse here. Sing those spiritual songs. That's an indication of where your mind is and where your spirit is. Okay. I'm going to shut her down right there because we're about out of time. We've got about 30 seconds or so. Any last minute questions or comments? Okay, we'll pick up on that thought next week about the singing.